I can understand English perfectly, but when it's time for me to speak English with a real person in a real scenario, my brain just freezes. If that sounds like you, don't worry. It's absolutely normal. Every English learner has already experienced this at some point in their lives. In today's episode, I'm going to unpack 7 reasons why that happens, 7 reasons why you feel like while you can understand English perfectly, you can't speak it as well as you wish. And most importantly, I'm going to give you some actionable tips and strategies that you can start implementing this week so you can finally become the confident English speaker you know you can be. So, let's get started. Hey there, how's it going? Thiago here, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. How have you been? Hope you've been doing well. Hope you've been having a nice week so far, and it's great to be here once again, hanging out with you and speaking a little bit about English learning. In case you're listening to me for the very first time, this podcast is designed to help intermediate and advanced learners of English communicate with more confidence, more accuracy, more clarity, and more awareness. If this sounds like something you want for yourself and your English, subscribe to the channel if you are listening on YouTube, or follow the show if you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. That way, you won't miss a single new episode. All right, so if you have an issue, if you have a problem, the very first step is becoming aware of the problem and becoming aware of why that is happening in the first place. That's exactly what we're going to be doing here because this is a pain point that I see in many learners. I can understand English, but I can't speak it, or I don't feel like I can speak fluently, or I lack confidence, even though I have a lot of knowledge about grammar, vocabulary, expressions, and so on. So first, we're going to be dissecting here 7 main reasons I have identified for this. I'm going to offer you also some really cool analogies to explain them so that you can have a mental picture and that way better assimilate these reasons. And I'm also going to give you some tips on how you can start fixing those problems there. All right. So reason number 1, why you might be feeling that way is because you're not practicing speaking enough. That is the most important one. And yes, it might seem obvious on the surface, but it's much deeper than that. Let me give you here the first analogy of the episode. Think of driving a car. Driving a car. You can read manuals about driving a car all day. You can have a lot of knowledge about traffic laws, about what the signs on the road mean, about the parts of the car, where the gear stick is, the pedals are, the mirrors, the rear view mirrors, you know, everything about the car, inside and out. You can have all that knowledge, but ultimately, you learn to drive by actually doing it. Driving is a highly active activity. The more you do it, the better you become at it. All right? Speaking English is the same thing. You may have a lot of knowledge of English up in your head. You may be able to study with grammar books and dictionaries and consume lots of media in English and recognize many things you see and hear. But this is all overly passive, receptive, all right? Speaking is a productive skill. Productive because it's not only about having the knowledge, but it's also about synchronizing the physicality of it. There is physicality involved in speaking. I am talking to you right now. If you are on video, if you are watching me on video, hopefully you can see that the act of speaking is a highly active physical act. It's not just about my knowledge of the language. You see, I'm using body language here. I'm using some gestures. I'm synchronizing my breath, the way I'm breathing, with my tongue, my mouth, my muscles of articulation in order to produce sounds that hopefully you can recognize and understand. So my message is passed. So just like driving is an active skill, it's a physical skill. You have to learn the mechanics. You have to practice the mechanics. Speaking is the same thing. That's the first reason why many learners feel like when they read something, when they listen to something, they can understand fine. But when they have to produce spoken language, they freeze because there is more going on in speaking. Like I said, it's about synchronizing your knowledge with your mouth, with your tongue, with your muscles of articulation, with your breathing, with your gestures, all that. So if you don't practice that skill enough of vocalizing, of voicing your thoughts and opinions in English, your speaking skills won't be that good, won't be as developed as your passive receptive skills. There's also something related to that I call the mental mumble trap. This is about thinking in English. Many learners, they think in English, they try to think in English, and a lot of their knowledge is up here in their heads. When they are reading a text, they are reading with their, let's say, reading voice, inner voice, which is silent. Nobody else can hear it. Or when they are studying or even having inner monologues inside their heads, only they can hear. And maybe in their minds, they sound extremely fluent. But they don't speak aloud. They don't practice speaking aloud. So when they have to speak aloud, they realize that there is this disconnect between what their English sounds like in their head and what their English actually sounds like in real life when they actually vocalize those words and sentences. And I certainly experienced that myself as a learner. When I started to read things aloud in English, it was a reality check for me, because when I read a piece of text silently in my mind, just with my reading voice up in my head, I sounded extremely fluent. I knew how to pronounce every single word. But when I tried to read those same words and sentences aloud in the text, it's like suddenly I didn't know how to pronounce the words, or I didn't know how to articulate certain sentences. I felt completely the opposite of fluent. So there is that disconnect. So the first reason why you feel like you can understand English but you can't speak it is probably because you haven't been practicing enough of this active skill, this physical skill of speaking, of talking, of using your voice. So what are some solutions to this? Well, you can start by talking to yourself aloud. So you can start by narrating your day, describing objects, or even practice answering questions aloud by yourself. If somebody asks me maybe about my hometown, hey, where do you come from? Could you tell me a little bit about the city where you come from? How would I answer that? And then practice answering that question aloud while you are cleaning the house or doing something around the house, talking to yourself aloud. All right. Once you feel comfortable speaking aloud by yourself, the next natural step would be to find speaking partners. And nowadays, with technology and the internet, this is something that is pretty easy to find. I'm talking about online groups that share a common interest, language exchange apps that connect you with other speakers of English who are also trying to improve, private communities of like-minded English learners that come together to learn together. So nowadays, with technology, it's much easier to find these online groups. Now, if you're looking for something a little bit more specific or even guided, hiring a tutor or a private teacher is also a great solution, because not only would you get the chance to practice with someone, your teacher in this case, but you will be getting something incredibly valuable, which is personalized feedback. Somebody listening to you, an experienced teacher listening to you and providing you with feedback on specifically what is good about your speaking, what could be improved, specific areas when it comes to vocabulary, grammar, or even pronunciation. All right. So getting that personalized feedback from a teacher is invaluable. This is a great opportunity for me to let you know that my speaking program is open and is accepting registrations. This is a brand new program that I have just put together, and it's unlike anything you have ever seen, because these are not live classes. We're going to be interacting for 3 weeks daily on a topic. The topic for this first group is going to be learning and growing. So for 3 weeks in July, we're going to be talking about this topic together, you and I, and a group of other learners who participate via Telegram audio messages. The whole process will be guided. I'm going to send you prompts every week for you to study record your answers to those prompts, share those audio messages with me in the Telegram group. I'm going to listen to your messages and then send you an audio message with my feedback. You can re-record your answers. You can ask me follow-up questions based on that topic. And, it's going to be a great, intense 3 weeks of talking via audio messages on Telegram. And it's a great program because you don't have to attend a live class at a certain time. So it works very well, especially if you are a busy person. If you don't have time for private classes or attending classes, and you want an opportunity, you need an opportunity to practice more of this act of speaking while having my feedback, having feedback from an experienced teacher. So if you want to learn more about the speaking program and how you can join, the link is here in the description of the video, in the pinned comment below on YouTube, and also in the show notes if you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. The program starts officially on July 7th, 2025, and runs for 3 weeks, ending on July 25th. All right. So I really encourage you to give it a try, enroll, and I think you're going to really dig it. All right. So do check it out. Reason number 2, not enough intentional study. Not enough intentional study. So let me give you another analogy here. Think of a sponge and a sculptor. When you consume English passively, when you watch podcasts, videos on YouTube, read books, listen to English as a whole, it's like you are a sponge. And as a good sponge that I know you are absorbing all that information. All right? But in order for you to speak, just being a sponge, just absorbing information is not going to be enough for you. You need to become more of a sculptor. A sculptor sculpts things, does things with the materials, with the raw materials he or she has. So it's like you have a lump of clay and you start molding that lump of clay into something. You see, it's a highly active physical process as well. So the way to be more of a sculptor in your English learning is by also setting aside time in your week to properly, formally, and intentionally study the language. It goes beyond just consuming content. One way you can do that is by reviewing grammar, by understanding why certain structures work the way they do. Because maybe, for example, you can understand a present perfect sentence when you see that in a movie. You recognize that pattern, all right? But can you actually form sentences in the present perfect when you speak English, when you have a conversation with someone? That's a totally different type of skill, being able to recognize the structure in a movie versus actually using the structure when you are speaking. One thing I notice all the time in my adult students is how much they struggle with formulating questions. Formulating questions in English. They understand questions when they are asked. When I ask them questions, they understand and they answer. But when they have to create questions to their partners, for example, in a conversation, they struggle to properly formulate questions because then, you have to invert the order of certain words. The auxiliary verbs usually come first. So they really struggle with that. Just to give you an idea of how much these two things are different, being able to recognize something versus actually being able to use it. When it comes to vocabulary, being intentional with your studies is also about actually using the words you come across, actively using them in your sentences, in your conversations, which brings me to something called recall versus recognition. Most of the time, I find that learners have a very easy time with recognition, but they struggle with recall. What is the difference? Recognition is about, well, as the name suggests, recognizing a word when you see it. You don't necessarily use it, but you recognize it when you see it. To offer you an example here, it's like being in a crowded place, and then you are able to recognize a person there in that crowded place just by looking at the person's face. You go, oh yeah, I know that person. I've seen that person before. You see, you don't have to remember the person's name. You don't even remember where you've seen that person before, but you look at that person's face and you recognize the person. This is recognition. Now, recall in that situation, for example, would be trying to remember the person's name before they even say anything, or trying to remember where you actually met that person for the first time. Because you see, it's about actively searching in your memory to retrieve their name, to retrieve the place where you met. That is harder, all right? So it's much easier to just recognize the person than to actively search in your memory for the place, for the person's name. The same thing happens with English vocabulary, all right? It's much easier for you to recognize words that you've already come across in the past when you are watching something than to actually recall them in your mind, in your memory, in order to be able to use them, all right? So how do you fix that? Well, by engaging in more active, intentional study time, not just consuming English or listening to English passively, all right? So this is another point that might be hurting your English fluency when you have to speak, not studying enough English. So be more intentional with your studies, with grammar structures, with vocabulary building. Now, moving on to reason 3, that's kind of the opposite scenario. Insufficient English consumption. Insufficient English consumption that goes beyond books. Going back to the car analogy here, imagine you regularly take your car to the mechanic, and the mechanic always does a checkup on your car, opens up the hood, makes sure that the engine is working fine, fine-tunes the engine there, so your car is in proper condition to run, all right? This is like you, when you study deliberately, when you go to your English class, when you have that study time in your week to study, this is you fine-tuning the engine, let's say, making sure your car, your English, is in proper condition to run. But just like a car won't run without gas, your English won't run without consumption, without exposure, all right? So view exposure to English, consuming English media regularly as the fuel, as the gas that you put in your car so that your car can actually run, all right? So just having a finely tuned car is not enough. You need fuel in it, all right? So, it's those 10, 15 minutes, 30 minutes per day that you spend listening to a podcast in English, reading a book in English, all right? Watching videos on YouTube or watching a movie. Think of those moments of exposure, of consumption, as adding fuel to your English, all right? Combining that with the active approach of studying, that's the key to improving your English fluency in the long run. Remember that exposure helps you internalize natural phrasing, rhythm, and common expressions you won't always find in textbooks. So while studying formally is great, you won't always find colloquial expressions, phrasal verbs, and idioms only in textbooks. You need to consume natural media in English, let's say. So, how can you do this? Well, make it enjoyable for yourself. Consume content you love, all right? Listen to podcasts, watch YouTube videos, movies, read books, all in English, but about topics that you care about, either that you love learning about or that you are curious about learning, all right? If you do that, learning English becomes something actually pleasant. You will start associating that with entertainment. Because, you are watching your favorite movies, you are listening to your favorite songs in English. I mean, how can that be boring? All right? So the takeaway here is immerse yourself in English as much as possible outside of formal lessons. So yes, think to yourself, am I studying English enough? No, so I have to study more. But maybe you are the other type of learner. Yeah, you have been studying a lot, but you haven't been consuming English enough. So consume more English. These two things must go hand in hand, all right? Moving on to reason 4, you have unrealistic expectations about your speaking. That could be another reason why you feel like you can understand English well, but you can't speak it. Why? Think of another analogy here. Think of the toddler versus the orator analogy. A toddler is a baby, is a small child, usually from 1 to 3 years old, all right? So think of a child, a toddler at that age, let's say 2.5, 3 years old. All right. You wouldn't expect a toddler to give a flawless, sophisticated, intricate speech, would you? A toddler who is learning to speak usually speaks very basic sentences, 2 to 3 word sentences. The pronunciation is kind of shaky. The grammar is kind of broken. Yeah. So would you expect that child to speak like a great orator? Of course not. And you actually encourage the child to keep going. And you feel happy with the child's progress, right? Imagine the child goes, red ball. And they go, yeah, a red ball. Good job. Or the child goes, hungry. One, eat. Yeah, eat. Hungry. Okay? So you actually celebrate the fact that the child is starting to communicate. So what I see happening a lot, especially among adult students, is that many of them know they communicate well in their first language. Many of them know that they are articulate, they communicate in a sophisticated way in their first language. But when they try to communicate at the same high level in English, they realize they can't do that. They feel frustrated. And I know it can be incredibly frustrating because you know you are capable of more, right? You know that in your native language, you communicate extremely well, but you can't communicate at the same high level in English. So you feel inadequate. You feel like you're not being yourself because you know you are capable of more, but because of the language barrier there, you just can't communicate at the same high level. But remember that just like you wouldn't expect so much from a toddler, don't expect so much from you if you are just starting out learning the language, or if you are still at an intermediate level, trying to break through that plateau to become a more advanced user of English. It's part of the process, okay? So the solution for this is embrace simplicity. Embrace simplicity. It's okay to speak simply. Prioritize clarity over complexity, all right? And also be patient because accept that improvement is gradual, all right? Be okay with communicating maybe in a simpler way now with simpler sentences, limited vocabulary. But if you keep practicing, if you keep doing the things that we have already discussed so far, actively practicing the physicality of speaking, studying with intention, and regularly consuming media in English, if you do that over time, you will start communicating in a more sophisticated way, just like you communicate in the first language. But that takes time. Lower your bar for perfection. Focus on communicating, not on sounding super sophisticated from day one. All right? So think to yourself, you might be having unrealistic expectations about your speaking. That's why you feel like you can understand, but you can't speak it. Reason 5 has to do with the fear of speaking, which is also what I call the spotlight effect. Maybe you are a person who suffers from shyness, anxiety, or simply the fear of making mistakes. If you have those, that can make you freeze. Maybe you sound super fluent when you are rehearsing a presentation at home by yourself and you are speaking out loud. But once you are on stage, for example, you freeze because, suddenly you have all eyes on you. You start panicking and you start thinking that people there are just waiting for you to slip up, to make a mistake, to mispronounce something, and then you freeze. So if you suffer from this, shyness, anxiety, or if you have this extreme fear of making mistakes, here are some things you can do to fix that. Start small and start safe. You can start practicing speaking English with just a small group of trusted friends or even a supportive teacher. I had a case like that with a student recently, one of my private students, because when we started having classes together, she felt very insecure to speak English. And she wanted to have just one-on-one classes with me because, she would feel more comfortable. So we did that. We had private classes together for about 2 months, just the two of us. But then after that, I started to talk to her, and slowly she started to feel more comfortable with the idea of joining a group and practicing speaking and studying with other people. So nowadays, she joins the group class. She doesn't have one-on-one classes anymore. Yeah, you see, so you can view that as progress, as starting small and safe. All right. So in her case, she needed to have some classes with me first, gain a little bit of confidence just with the two of us. And now she's able to move on to the group session. And then, she can talk to other people there. You see, but it's a process. So this is the first thing I would recommend. If you struggle with shyness or anxiety like that, practice with a small group of trusted friends, or get a supportive teacher and start with one-on-one classes first. All right. Also focus on the message. Yeah. Remember that most people in real life, they care more about what you say than how perfect your grammar is. It's all about your message. And you might also consider having some communication classes. Maybe, not just conversation classes in English, but classes in general to improve that fear of speaking, that anxiety. Maybe acting classes or public speaking programs, even in your native language, can help you build general confidence. So you don't even have to do that in English. Maybe enroll for acting classes or a public speaking course in your native language, because usually in these courses, in these classes, they teach you techniques on how to overcome shyness, how to overcome paralysis when you have to deliver a speech or presentation in front of an audience, how to feel more confident in your delivery. So these are skills that are transferable from your native language to your English learning and your English language. So consider that. So the takeaway here is confront this fear gradually. Every small step builds confidence. And if you are a person who is extremely shy or anxious, it might take you a few months or even a couple of years for you to gradually build up your confidence. Your confidence is not built overnight. It's usually a long process, that might take years to develop, all right? So remember that. Reason number 6 is called your native language habits carry over. Carry over, you are transferring some of your native language habits into your second language habits, English language habits. View your native language as your blueprint for communication. So start by thinking about how you communicate in your first language, because the way you talk in your first language, you might be actually talking or speaking the same way, but there might be some hiccups there in your native language that you are just transferring to your English speaking. Here are some questions for you to reflect. For example, do you mumble? Do you tend to mumble in your first language? When you mumble, you don't move your mouth as much. You don't articulate the words so much. So do you mumble in your first language? If you do that, chances are you also mumble when you speak English. Do you speak too fast or too slow in your native language? Do you lack body language when you talk in your first language? Consider these language habits, because you might be transferring those to English. Even little things like pronouncing the plural forms. I noticed that some speakers in Brazil, for example, they have a tendency in their day-to-day communication to omit the S in the words, the plural form of the word. So they just speak with the singular word when they actually mean plural. And I have met learners, Brazilian learners, for example, who carry that bad habit of omitting the plural form of the words into English. So instead of saying, I have 10 books, I've heard some learners saying, I have 10 book, not 10 books. You see, so little things like that. So do a little self-analysis on how you speak in your first language. That's the first part of the solution, self-assessment. One idea is you can record yourself speaking in your native language for 3, 4, 5 minutes, and then you listen back and then you analyze. How articulate you sound in your first language, how well you project your voice, how your grammar is when you're speaking in your native language, what kind of words you use the most, all right? Once you have done that self-assessment first step, the next step would be working on core skills of communication in general, like voice projection, learning to project your voice better so that people can understand you, clear articulation, moving your mouth more than you might be used to. Your pacing, speaking not too fast, not too slowly, and of course, using more gestures and body language when you speak. All right? Going back to the acting classes or public speaking courses, those classes might help you with that as well. Voice projection, clear articulation, pacing, gestures, and so on. So the takeaway here is improve your overall communication skills, even in your native language. And that would also benefit your English. Becoming a better speaker of your first language will help you become a better speaker of English. Trust me. And finally, reason 7 is lack of patience. Lack of patience. Remember that learning a language, learning to speak English fluently and confidently is a marathon, not a sprint. It takes time. And here's the thing, speaking is often the last skill to fully develop. At least in my experience, speaking tends to be the last skill to fully develop. And I certainly experienced that myself. To me, my speaking was the last skill to be fully developed. I started to understand texts first very well, and then I started to understand the songs I listened to and the movies I watched, the series I watched. But my productive skills, mainly writing and especially speaking, they came later. Speaking came much, much later. All right. And I think it makes perfect sense for the speaking skills to be the last ones to be fully developed, because speaking is when you tie it all together in many ways. Think about this. You've been spending months and even a few years reading a lot of English, writing English, watching things, listening to things, learning vocabulary, studying grammar, right? Absorbing, getting all this knowledge. You've been spending years doing that, all right? Speaking all that requires a lot of coordination, requires you to be able to access all that knowledge that is already lying in your mind. And not only accessing that knowledge, but coordinating, synchronizing that knowledge with the delivery, with how you breathe, with how you move your mouth, with how you move your tongue, your articulation muscles. You see? So I think it makes perfect sense for the speaking skills to be the last ones, because it's when you tie it all together. All right? So be patient with yourself. Make sure that you enjoy the journey of learning English. All right? Celebrate your small wins. I always talk about that. Celebrate small victories. For example, if you are able to use in a conversation a phrasal verb that you just learned recently, great. That's a victory. All right? If you are watching a movie and then you are able to get a joke in English that maybe years ago you wouldn't have gotten, celebrate that. Yeah, victory. Small win. All right? If you are able to properly ask a question using present perfect or another grammar tense you are struggling with, and you use that correctly, celebrate that. You see, I even shared a story of a learner in last week's episode, right? A learner from Turkey who shared that he had this experience of being an interpreter at the university he works at, right? And that experience was a boost in his confidence because, that served as evidence that, his English was becoming better and better. So, you see, these are all small victories, small wins that you need to learn how to celebrate along the way. And of course, stay consistent. Don't give up even if the process feels low. And you will experience days when you feel more fluent than others, when you feel more confident than others. That's absolutely fine. You will be frustrated. You will experience not just one plateau, but at least 2 plateaus in your journey, all right? You might experience multiple plateaus in your learning journey, but don't give up. Even if it's not that obvious, many things are happening in the background, trust me. And then one day, you're going to realize that you are speaking fluently and confidently, and you don't even know how it all began, how you started to speak that way. But it was just a culmination of all these things you have been doing for all these months, all these years, consistently. All right? So be kind to yourself and persist. The speaking will come. Trust me. Just to quickly recap here, remember, the first one is not enough speaking practice. So make sure you regularly practice the physical act of speaking English, of producing sounds with your mouth. All right. And you can join my Speaking Accelerator program, which starts now in July for that. That's a great opportunity already to kick things off. And you're going to have 3 weeks of talking in English and getting my feedback. So do check it out. Also, not enough intentional study. Maybe you haven't been studying English intentionally and deliberately enough, so your speaking is suffering. So fix that by setting aside some time in your week to be deliberate about your English studies. Reason number 3 might be the opposite. You haven't been consuming English enough. Maybe you are a good student, you take formal classes, you do what you have to do in terms of homework or assignments that your teacher gives you, but have you been regularly, ideally daily, consuming English media like podcasts, videos, and movies and series and books and songs? Have you been doing that? If not, start doing that. Also, reason number 4, you might be having unrealistic expectations about your speaking. You might be expecting yourself to communicate at the same high level as you do in your first language, but you don't have the language baggage, the language repertoire in English yet to be able to do that. So be okay with simplicity. Focus on communicating your message in a simple, straightforward way, making sure people understand you, and trust that with time, your level of sophistication will increase, but you gotta be patient. Another reason we covered was the fear of speaking itself, even in your first language. Maybe you are a shy person. Maybe you have anxiety. Maybe you fear making mistakes in public. So start small, start safe with one person that you trust, maybe a teacher, or maybe a small group of friends that you trust in a safe environment, and build up your confidence from there. All right? You can also take some acting classes or public speaking courses to help you with that. So we also covered those. Reason 6, your native language might be influencing your communication skills in English, your speaking skills in English. So do a little self-assessment and try to identify if you have bad habits when speaking your first language. Maybe you have bad speaking habits in your first language that are transferring to the way you speak English. Mumbling, not articulating the words properly, not using body language or gestures. So think about that. Not projecting your voice accordingly. So do that self-assessment. And number 7, reason 7 was lack of patience. Understand that the speaking is usually the last skill that tends to be fully developed above all others. So, just trust the process, enjoy the process, and know that with time, your speaking will catch up with your other skills. All right? So, as you can see, it all boils down to practice, intentionality, exposure, realistic expectations, managing fear, and having patience. There's no magic bullet. It's just consistent effort. All right? So, which of these points resonated most with you today? Let me know in the comment section below. And not only which one of these has resonated most with you, but what are you planning to do this week to start chipping away at that wall, to start fixing those issues? All right? So, let me know in the comment section. I am curious to know. To conclude today's episode, it's time for the Learner's Corner. And for the Learner's Corner today, I have here an audio message from a Brazilian viewer named Clovis. Let's listen to what Clovis has to say.
Hi, Thiago. How are you? My name is Clovis Azevedo. I come from Brazil too. Nowadays, I'm living in America. And I want to say you about your job. Thank you so much. You are helping me to get my English better and my pronunciation and my knowledge. I discovered the knowledge with you. And I studied English in Brazil during about a year, but it was 10 years ago. And I arrived in America 4 months ago, and my English wasn't so good. But I tried to practice every single day, as many as possible, and you helped me so much in this journey. Because when I discovered you, I am listening to you every single day when I'm going to gym, when I'm going to my job, and you help me get my pronunciation, my knowledge, and everything in English. You are helping me, and I will go back to Brazil maybe in 2 months, and I want to keep learning there. If you can say something to help me in this journey, I will be really appreciated. Thank you so much, and congratulations to your job.
All right, Clovis, thank you so much for the wonderful message. I'm glad to know that my work has been helping you with your English fluency and confidence. And it's great to know that you listen to me even at the gym. That's awesome. And I would say that your English sounds very good already. You know, it's great because you said that you studied for a year, a long time ago. And now you've been living in the US for 4 months. And probably you're going to stay there for 2 more months. That's 6 months, right? So, yeah, I mean, you should definitely celebrate that because you sound great. You know, you sound great. Your pronunciation is clear. You sound pretty fluent already. And I'm sure that as the time passes and the more you keep in touch with the language and practicing, the better you will become. It's inevitable. All right. So the thing I would tell you as a recommendation is, well, take advantage that you are in the US right now and immerse yourself in the language as much as you can. Only speak in English with people there and don't resort to your native language. You know, a huge mistake that I see some people make is they go on an exchange program abroad, and then when they find people there that speak their native language, they speak their native language. I mean, don't do that. I know that you have probably made a lot of sacrifice to be able to have this experience you're having right now of being in the US for a few months. Maybe you had to save a lot of money to do that, or maybe you had to organize yourself there in order to be able to do that. So why would you speak Portuguese, in our case, with other Brazilians there? You know, it's like a waste of effort or waste of resources, you know? So if you planned an exchange program for yourself and you are in another country that speaks English, take full advantage of that. That's what I would say. And once you come back to Brazil, Clovis, make sure you keep studying, keep practicing, follow some of these tips that I shared in this episode, and I'm sure you will do great. But thanks again for the wonderful message. I really appreciate it. If you guys want to do it just like Clovis, you can send me an audio message by going to speakpipe.com/English with Thiago, or you can also write me an email at hello.teacherthiago@gmail.com. You can share your story, a testimonial, or just a cool experience you've had. It's going to be great to feature your message here on the podcast. Don't forget to check out and learn more about my Speaking Accelerator program starting out on July 7th. I think it's a great opportunity for you to practice speaking English on a topic and getting my personalized feedback. So do check it out. Link in the description. Also subscribe to the channel if you're not a subscriber yet. Like this video, share this video with a friend who's also learning English, and leave me a comment letting me know what you thought about today's episode. Okay? If you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, leave me a 5-star review on those platforms and follow the show so you don't miss a single new episode. I'm Thiago. I'm signing off. It was great to hang out with you yet once again. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll be talking to you very soon in the upcoming episode. Bye-bye.